Inside her abdomen, life was forming. Within weeks, she would become the youngest confirmed mother in human history. Her body, an unsolvable equation of biology and tragedy. The case of Lina Medina shattered every boundary of science, morality, and belief. Her pregnancy was confirmed through X-rays, her delivery witnessed by surgeons. Her silence guarded for a lifetime. The law called it a crime. Medicine called it a miracle. History called it impossible. But beneath the headlines and hospital records lies something deeper. A question no one ever answered. Who was the father? If this story unsettled you, let it stay with you. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to The Shadow Book, where every story reminds us that the darkest truths are never imagined. They are recorded. In early 1939, in the mountain village of Ticarapo, Castrovirreyna province, a 5-year-old girl named Lina Medina began to exhibit a swelling that no one in her household could explain. Her father, Gerardo Medina, a silversmith, assumed it to be malnutrition or a parasitic growth. Her mother, Victoria Loea, measured the girl's abdomen with a length of twine, noting the daily expansion. The child displayed no pain, no fever, no outward distress, only a silence that made her parents believe it must be internal. In rural Peru, where distance made doctors a last resort, they waited too long before traveling. When they finally descended from the Andean hills toward Pisco, the girl was wrapped in a wool shawl, her small frame distorted beneath its folds. At the local clinic, the physician's initial notes described a distended abdomen, probable cystic mass. He recorded her weight, pulse, and age with routine precision. Her respiration was calm. She met every question with a short, obedient nod. He pressed her abdomen gently. The texture was to taut the mayo and omen beneath, firm but rhythmic. His pencil paused above the examination sheet. He ordered a second opinion from Lima, forwarding a summary to Dr. Gerardo Lazadada, who was known for treating pediatric abnormalities. The tone of his letter remained professional, but his final line betrayed hesitation. Condition beyond my present understanding. Suspect tumor, though movement noted. When the girl reached the Lima hospital, the contrast was immediate. The city air was heavy, the corridors tiled and echoing. Nurses lifted her onto the examination table, removing layers of hand-woven cloth. She was underweight for her age, bones narrow, eyes steady. Dr. Lazid entered without ceremony, his assistants observing in silence. He inspected her body, marking the curvature and firmness of the lower abdomen. There was no external sign of trauma, no indication of illness, only growth. He adjusted the stethoscope, placed it carefully above the navel, and listened. The silence lasted several seconds, then broke with an irregular pulse. He moved the instrument again. The rhythm returned, strong, steady, distinct from the child's own heartbeat. His face did not change, but his hand trembled when he withdrew the earpieces. The record sheet was revised, palpable. Motion consistent with fetal movement. Diagnosis uncertain. The parents waited in the corridor. They were not informed of the findings. The doctor ordered radiographs citing the possibility of fluid accumulation, but avoided using the word that now filled the examination room. His assistant noted that the physician's voice had changed. Lower, deliberate, as if addressing a case that should not exist. That evening, under weak hospital lighting, Lazada re-examined the notes from Pisco. Each earlier assumption, parasite, tumor, glandular disorder, collapsed against the evidence of what he had heard. He wrote a second private memo, random to the National Academy of Medicine. Subject: pediatric patient. Aged 5 years, 7 months, audible fetal heart tones detected. Down the corridor. Lina sat beside her mother, legs dangling above the floor. She asked if the doctor would remove the thing inside. Her mother stroked her hair and said nothing. When Lizardo returned, he stood at the threshold for a long time, watching the child trace circles with her finger against the wooden bench. Then, without addressing the family, he called for another physician to witness the next examination. His face had gone pale, the color drained from professional certainty into disbelief. He turned away before speaking, his voice barely audible to the assistant beside him. "There are 2 lives here." The nurse recorded the remark in the margin of her notes, uncertain whether it was meant for the file or for himself. In the official logbook, the day's entry ended with a single line. Further evaluation required, cause of swelling undetermined. The diagnosis would not be shared until radiographs made denial impossible. Until then, the parents were told only to remain in Lima for observation. The doctor folded the report, locked it in his drawer, and requested a second stethoscope for confirmation. Outside, the hospital corridor was silent, except for the faint echo of footsteps, one pair small, one deliberate, moving in opposite directions. The following morning, the small ward at the Lizardo clinic filled with the sound of machines and muted conversation. The child was brought into the radiography room wrapped in a hospital blanket that swallowed her frame. Technicians arranged the plates. The physician adjusted exposure and the flash of the X-ray momentarily whitened the walls. When the images developed, the first outlines appeared unmistakably human: spine, limbs, and the small arc of a skull nested within her abdomen. Dr. Gerardo Lizardo stood beside Dr. Buslu, the assistant surgeon, both silent as the film darkened in the tray. The radiographs were held against the light box. The bone structure was clear, proportionate to a late-term fetus. In the observation log, a nurse recorded gestation approximately 7 months. The file was labeled, dated, and placed on the physician's desk. No one spoke of the girl's age yet. The image spoke too loudly. The pelvic examination followed. Conducted with precision and minimal speech, it revealed full sexual maturity. Anatomically, the findings belonged to a grown woman, though the patient's height measured under 1 meter. No developmental disorder explained the condition. The term precocious puberty was entered into the chart. The discovery was summarized clinically, but the implication was unbearable. A body, not yet old enough for school, had carried life to term. Outside the examination room, nurses exchanged whispers that carried through the corridor. A junior doctor asked whether to inform the Ministry of Health. Lazard refused. He ordered confidentiality and retrieved the fresh file to replace the original notes, intending to separate medical record from human scandal. The staff followed protocol with forced obedience, each signature written in small, hesitant script. When word reached the maternity ward, the case became rumor: the girl with the heartbeat. The other physicians came under the pretext of consultation. One compared the X-ray to a print from obstetric textbooks. Another argued error or hoax. Yet none could deny the evidence in the film tray. The fetus moved during auscultation, its position recorded through the stethoscope's metallic hum. That evening, Lizardo met privately with 2 senior colleagues. They discussed the ethics of documentation, whether publication would invite ridicule or moral prosecution. The decision was made to continue observation until delivery. A preliminary report was drafted for the National Academy of Medicine to be filed under abnormal endocrinological case. No mention of assault or legal implications appeared. Only data, pulse rate, uterine measurements, hormonal levels, gestational stage. The child remained compliant through every procedure. She answered questions about appetite and fatigue without distress, her tone detached as though the attention itself were the illness. Lozada noted her calmness, describing it as unusual maturity. Others saw withdrawal, a survival instinct mistaken for composure. Late at night, the doctor reviewed the day's radiographs again. The fetus was in cephalic position, ready for birth within weeks. He labeled the film with the date, April 1939, and beneath it, age of mother, 5 years, 7 months. His pen lingered after the number, refusing the period that would make the sentence final. He locked the file in his drawer, turned the key, and extinguished the lamp. In the silence that followed, the ticking of the wall clock replaced the double rhythm that had filled the day, a steady reminder of 2 lives measured by one impossible truth. The hospital corridors were quieter in the mornings, though the work continued without interruption. Dr. Lazard's instructions were explicit. The case was to be documented completely without interpretation. Lina was brought into the photographic room where a white curtain had been hung behind her. The lighting was severe and unfiltered. She stood as instructed, hands at her sides, profile to the camera. The photograph captured her abdomen's curve with scientific detachment. No expression was visible. No attempt made to comfort or explain. The camera clicked once. That single frame would later become the only surviving visual proof of what had occurred. The photograph was labeled, filed, and added to the hospital's clinical archive. Within hours, it was replicated in film documentation. Lazard had arranged for motion reels to record the case for the National Academy of Medicine. Each frame was measured, the exposure carefully calculated. The girl did not cry or resist. Her silence simplified the process. In the projection room, Lozada reviewed the footage with his colleagues. The movements, small adjustments, breathing, stillness were observed without commentary. The conversation turned to preservation, the need to protect the film from misuse, from sensationalism, from public eyes. Yet every precaution betrayed its own irony. The act of recording had already stripped the child of privacy. By the end of the week, duplicates of the reels were packed in protective containers for transport to the academy. The first delivery reached Lima intact. The second, sent later through rough terrain toward Tecrapo, was partially destroyed. Reports note that several reels fell into a river during the journey. What survived was incomplete. Just enough to demonstrate, not enough to defend. In May, Lazard presented the findings formally. The report included observations from X-rays, photo, graphic evidence, and a diagnosis of precocious puberty. His tone remained objective. Patient presents full ovarian maturity. Pelvic proportions inadequate for vaginal delivery. He avoided any mention of morality or violation. The medical community accepted the record with professional discomfort. Privately, some members argued the presentation should have been postponed. A minority questioned whether publishing such material was ethical. One physician from the academy described the atmosphere as dissecting a child while she still breathed. The words did not enter the official minutes. In the archives, the final copy of the documentation was marked confidential. Pediatric anomaly. It was stored apart from the hospital's general records. Only Lozada retained a duplicate, sealed in his personal collection under instructions for educational use only. Lina was returned to her ward afterward, unaware that her image had already entered medical history. To the staff, she was no longer a patient, but a case number 5 to 739. The record replaced her identity, and the evidence became her only translation. When the nurse locked the cabinet containing the negatives, she wrote a brief note for inventory. Condition: verified, materials secured. Beneath it, an unapproved edition appeared later in the margin, written in another hand. This child will never leave the file. By nightfall, the reels were boxed and labeled for restricted viewing. The report was stamped once in red ink, then locked behind steel. No one spoke of it again in public sessions. The child slept in the same building, unaware that her stillness had been immortalized. Somewhere beyond the white corridors, the reels turned to silence. Sealed, preserved, and forgotten. On the morning of the 14th of May 1939. Preparations began before sunrise at the Lozada clinic in Lima. The staff moved, without conversation, arranging the instruments in precise order on metal trays. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and iodine. At the center of the operating room stood a narrow table, its surface covered in white linen. The patient, Lina Medina, was carried in by a nurse. 5 years, 7 months old, her eyes half closed from sedation. Her pulse was steady. The procedure scheduled was listed as therapeutic cesarean pediatric. Dr. Gerardo Lozada and Dr. Busalu stood on either side of the table. Dr. Coletta, the anesthetist, adjusted the mask and noted the time. At 8:37 a.m. the first incision was made. The scalpel's movement was unhurried, practiced, but its context had no precedent. Beneath the layers of tissue, the uterus appeared enlarged, vascular, and intact, biologically adult. No one spoke. The only sounds were the low hum of the sterilizer and the slow rhythm of the child's breathing through the mask. When the uterus was opened, the surgeons paused. The fetal membrane shimmered briefly in the light before being cut. A small, blood-wet infant emerged, crying, vigorous, unmistakably alive. A nurse took the newborn and wrapped him in gauze. His weight was recorded, 2.7 kilograms. He was named Gerardo after the attending physician. For several moments, the room remained suspended between relief and disbelief. Lazard looked down at his patient, the smallest mother in medical history, then turned back to the instrument tray. The umbilical cord was clamped, the uterus sutured in 3 layers, and the incision closed with silk. Each movement was deliberate, mechanical, unbroken by dialogue. The nurses charted every step with care, marking times to the minute. At 9:12 a.m., delivery confirmed. The anesthetist removed the mask. The girl's eyes opened, entered weakly. Lozada leaned close enough to ensure her airway was clear. Her first words were small and hoarse. "Can I go home now?" The nurse noted the sentence in the post-operative log, uncertain whether to include it in the permanent record. Outside the theater, the corridor filled with restrained excitement. Assistants whispered details to colleagues, each sentence reduced to data. Age, weight, gestation, recovery time. No one used the word rape. The conversation remained clinical, guarded by procedure. For the staff, the birth was not a crime scene, but an event, a phenomenon witnessed and measured. In the recovery room, the newborn was placed in a metal crib beside the surgical bed. His mother, still a child, slept beneath a thin hospital blanket, her arms too small to cradle him. Lozada dictated his first formal report. Successful cesarean performed on patient. Female, age 5 years 7 months, infant, male, 2.7 kilograms, APGAR satisfactory. The dictation ended with a pause. He added, "No comment, no reflection." When the Nurse transcribed the post-operative note she wrote: mother and son stable. Her pen hovered before adding the next lineage of mother: 5 years 7 months. She underlined it once, then drew a thin line through the final word, as if erasing the reality it represented. By evening, the clinic resumed normal function. Instruments were cleaned, linens replaced, and the theater prepared for another case. Yet the event remained palpable, an unspoken weight among the staff. The infant's cry had marked the end of a procedure and the beginning of a silence that would extend for decades. In the archive, Lozada filed the surgical report separately from the others, sealing it in a plain folder with no label. It joined the radiographs and the photographs already stored in his locked cabinet. The newborn's faint cry continued in the next room, rhythmic and unbroken. No one in the building celebrated. The staff dispersed quietly, leaving behind the sterile instruments that had turned an impossibility into fact and a human life into a medical anomaly. The story reached the press before the hospital could contain it. Within a week of the operation, details appeared in the Lima Daily La Cronica describing a 5-year-old mother in cautious language that blurred medicine and miracle. The headline was factual, but the tone betrayed fascination. By the end of May 1939, the case had spread to foreign dispatches. Editors in Europe demanded confirmation. American reporters telegraphed for statements from the Peruvian Ministry of Health. Inside the Lozada clinic, physicians avoided the telephone. Letters began arriving addressed to Dr. Lozada, personally requesting photographs, interviews, and statements. Some were printed on studio letterhead. One sent from California offered $5,000 for exclusive filming rights. The proposal described it as an educational documentary. Lazard read the letter once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the file marked Media Inquiries. His refusal was formal. Unauthorized filming prohibited by Peruvian Medical Board. In Texas, the San Antonio Light published an illustrated report dated 16 July, 1939, listing the infant's birth weight, 2.7 kilograms, beside the mother's exact age, 5 years, 7 months, 21 days. The contrast between numbers drew readers faster than any explanation. The story's tone was clinical, but its subtext was spectacle. Newspapers reprinted it internationally, each with minor distortions that grew with distance. At the clinic, Lozada's colleagues discussed whether the case should have remained private. Some believed silence was impossible. Others insisted that the truth required record. The debate took place over sterile trays and typed reports, far from the family who had no control over their names, now printed in multiple languages. The Peruvian Obstetrician and Midwife Association issued a statement demanding that the girl be admitted to the National Maternity Hospital for protection. Their appeal mixed professionalism with alarm, a call to safeguard the child against further intrusion. In Lima's cafes, medical students argued over anatomy and morality. The question of how a body so young could conceive replaced the question of who had caused it. On radio broadcasts, the case was mentioned briefly between news of European tension and local trade. Each repetition eroded the distinction between documentation and entertainment. When the first foreign correspondent arrived at the clinic, guards turned him away. The man returned 2 days later with a translator and an envelope of cash. Lazard refused again. Behind him, the nurses continued their rounds as if nothing had been said. The corridors smelled of antiseptic and newsprint. That evening, the hospital board convened an emergency meeting. The director, reading from prepared notes, reminded staff that patient confidentiality extended beyond national borders. This case, he said, exists only in our records. The order was recorded, stamped, and distributed to every department. It did not prevent the spread of the story. It only confirmed that control was lost. At the family's home, photographers lingered near the door, waiting for a glimpse of the girl. Her mother refused to open it. The curtains remained drawn. Each knock was logged as disturbance. Yet no law could protect them from curiosity disguised as journalism. In professional journals, the tone remained measured. Less medical published Dr. Eskimmel's technical account without speculation. But readers noticed the absence of emotion, the deliberate neutrality that concealed disgust. Science had won its proof, and the price was a child's anonymity. By late summer, the case was no longer a report, but a commodity. Her name appeared in catalogues of medical firsts. Stripped of context, Lazard's reputation grew abroad, but shrank at home. The press called her a miracle. The doctors called her data. The hospital director issued one final memo. All inquiries, domestic or foreign, are to be refused without exception. He signed, dated, and filed it under public relations. The seal was applied while outside the printing presses continued to repeat her name. The investigation began less than a week after the operation. The Ministry of Justice ordered an inquiry under Peruvian Penal Code Article 170, which classified pregnancy in any girl under 10 as irrefutable evidence of sexual abuse. A plain report was issued to the provincial police in Castro Varina instructing them to locate the perpetrator or contributing adult. The document carried no emotion, only a date and the directive determined responsible party. The first arrest came quickly. Lina Medina, the child's father, was detained at his home in Ticarapo. His tools of trade, a silversmith's hammer and chisel, were taken as symbolic evidence. Though unrelated to any charge, he was transported to the district station, booked, and questioned for 7 hours. The transcript recorded his answers in simple denials. "I have not touched her." When asked about possible suspects in the village, he named none. His release was approved after 2 days for lack of corroboration. The police log noted insufficient testimony, no witnesses. The mother, Victoria Leia, was interviewed next. She arrived trembling, clutching a small cloth bag. Her statement was short. She repeated that she had not understood what was happening to her daughter, that she thought the swelling was illness. At one point she began to cry, asking whether the doctors could remove whatever was left inside her. The officer continued writing, unresponsive. The central figure, Lina, was questioned in the presence of a nurse and interpreter. The transcript survives in fragments. Her responses were vague, consistent with her age. Answers about dolls, about food, about nothing that fit the questions. When asked who had touched her, she whispered something that was transcribed as, "I don't know." The session ended after 20 minutes. The record was signed by 3 adults, none of whom belonged to the family. F. Forensic capacity in 1939, Peru, was minimal. There were no DNA analyses, no psychological specialists, no protocol for interviewing victims under 10. The medical reports, though detailed, did not identify sexual trauma, only that conception had occurred. This ambiguity became the investigation shelter. Each department deferred responsibility to another. The police to the ministry to the courts to medical experts. Rumors filled the absence of evidence. Some whispered that the father was guilty. Others suggested a villager, a laborer, or even a traveling relative. No statement could be verified. Each name that entered the file was crossed out and replaced with a dash. By the Fourth week, the official suspect column read simply, unknown male not identified. A government inspector visited Lima to interview Dr. Lozada. His report was concise. Physician confirms pregnancy and delivery is genuine. Refuses speculation. Regarding cause. When pressed on the possibility of error, Lozada replied that radiographs and fetal analysis were incontrovertible. The inspector closed his notebook. In July, the ministry issued a final memorandum to conclude the case. The language was bureaucratic. No further evidence forthcoming. Investigation suspended pending additional information. The suspension became permanent. The folder containing all related documents, medical, judicial, and police, was stored in the Central Archive under a plain label, Medina Lina, 1939. Years later, when the file was reviewed, it contained conflicting statements, redundant copies, and multiple signatures, none aligned. The cover sheet listed the father as suspect. The second page listed released, and the last page left the space for offender blank. Every subsequent summary referred to the perpetrator as unknown. Justice, like medicine, concluded where language failed. In the months after the delivery, the infant was kept under observation at the Lozada Clinic in Lima. Hospital notes described him as healthy, full-term with stable reflexes. He was named Gerardo after the physician who had delivered him. The decision made quietly by Dr. Lozada ensured the record would remain self-contained, a closed circle of names within a single institution. Lina recovered quickly. Her small body adjusted to its altered form, though she was still too young to comprehend what had occurred. The nurses, following orders, treated her as a patient rather than a mother. The baby was placed in a separate room cared for by a rotation of attendants. In official correspondence, Lina was referred to as the elder sister. This designation would persist for years. After several weeks, the family returned briefly to Tico, but Gerardo remained in Lima under the supervision of Lozada. The arrangement was justified as medical necessity. In practice, it was an act of containment to keep the anomaly under institutional control. Lozada's home doubled as clinic and residence. Photographs taken during this period show an ordinary domestic scene, a middle-aged man seated at a table, a young girl beside him, and a baby on her lap. No caption identifies their relation. As Gerard grew, the fiction solidified. To neighbors, he was the doctor's ward. To visitors, Lina's younger brother. The illusion served both morality and medicine, preserving public dignity at the expense of truth. Within the clinic, the staff avoided using the word mother. In progress notes, the term was replaced with primary caregiver. The substitution appeared harmless, but it functioned as erasure. By 1945, Gerardo attended a private school near the clinic. His education was funded by Lozada, who regarded it as repayment for silence. Lina, now entering adolescence, began working part-time at Tahan, a clerk in the same facility. Her duties included filing patient records, some of which contained her own name. She never mentioned them. The boy's health remained good. Annual examinations listed normal development, though his file contained a recurring annotation. Avoid discussion of origins. Lozada, protective of both subjects, forbade any conversation about the past. The command was obeyed until the day the rule broke under ordinary circumstances. It happened around Gerard's 10th birthday. While visiting the clinic, he noticed a framed clipping on the wall, a yellowed page from a Texas newspaper dated 1939. It bore a headline he could not miss. World's youngest mother gives birth in Peru. Beneath the title was a photograph, familiar yet disorienting, a child with his own eyes standing before a white backdrop. Later that day, he asked a nurse who the girl was. The nurse hesitated, then deflected. A week later, a fellow student, the son of a hospital employee, repeated what he had overheard at home, that the miracle baby was Gerardo himself, and the girl in the photo was not his sister. The rumor spread quietly through the ward, before reaching him again from another mouth. When he confronted Lizardo, the doctor told him only that the information was not for discussion. Gerardo pressed further. Who was the girl? Why had everyone lied? The physician's silence served as answer. That evening, Lina found him sitting beside the newspaper clipping, his hands folded, expression blank. Then who is my father? He asked. She did not respond. In the hospital registry, the line identifying paternity had long remained blank. No revision was ever made. The deception had completed its purpose, a decade of concealment that protected reputations while ensuring no one in the family would ever speak without consequence. The next generation had inherited the silence of the fetched rest. The record of his birth framed on a wall would outlive them both. By the mid-1940s, Lina Medina was an adult in years, but not in circumstance. The case that had defined her childhood had become a static entry in journals and medical compilations. She found employment at the Lizardo Clinic, the same institution that had documented her as an anomaly. Her position was clerical, recording appointments, organizing patient files, typing correspondence. Her wage was modest but steady, and it allowed her to fund Gerardo's schooling. Each morning she passed the hallway where her photograph had once hung for instructional reference. It was gone, but the nail that held the frame remained. Few colleagues mentioned her past. Those who knew avoided her eyes in conversation. New staff recognized her name only from old files, never daring to ask if the story was true. Her tasks were routine: collate, transcribe, sign, repeat. She worked beneath fluorescent light that flattened color and expression alike. The rhythm of paperwork suited her, a silent arrangement between survival and disappearance. To patients she was anonymous, to physicians a reminder the clinic's reputation benefited quietly from her continued presence. Her existence authenticated its history even as the institution erased her identity from speech. Occasionally correspondence arrived from abroad medical societies requesting confirmation of details from 1939. Dr. Lizardo or his successors responded in measured language. Case verified, subject remains in good health. The responses bore no emotion, and she was never consulted. Her signature, once attached to her own file, was now applied to letters about other patients. Outside the clinic, curiosity persisted. Each anniversary of the birth renewed attention. Reporters visited Castrovirreyna province, speaking with villagers who remembered the story but not the details. Some claimed to have seen her. Others swore she had left the sea. Entry none knew that she sat daily behind a typewriter in Lima cataloguing other people's ailments. Her son, now a young man, visited occasionally. Their conversations were brief, formal, shaped by years of institutional restraint. He addressed her as Lina in public. At home, silence filled the space between them. The arrangement that had once protected them now rendered ordinary affection impossible. By the 1950s, new directors took over the clinic. Few retained personal knowledge of the 1939 case. The medical files were transferred to a locked cabinet marked Archives. Pediatrics Historic. She was assigned to the same floor, working within sight of the cabinet that contained her life's defining event. The proximity felt both protective and cruel. Visitors from medical universities occasionally toured the facility. When they asked about the youngest mother in history, guides gave brief summaries, never naming her. She listened from her desk, pen motionless above unfinished forms. Afterward, she continued writing as if nothing had been said. Years later, she modified her signature. Where she once wrote Lina M. Medina, she began to sign only L. Medina. The abbreviation provided distance. It also matched the initial stamped on her 1939 case file, as if the institution itself had reabsorbed her. In 1959, an editor from a Lima newspaper telephoned the clinic requesting access to her personnel record for an anniversary article. The receptionist transferred the call to her office. The reporter asked politely for confirmation that she was the same Lina Medina. She replaced the receiver without reply. Minutes later, she typed a memorandum to administration. Future inquiries of this nature should be declined. The paper published a short piece. Regardless, anonymous, citing unconfirmed reports. It repeated the same facts, unchanged for 20 years. That evening, before leaving work, she paused by the locked cabinet. The metal surface reflected the fluorescent light faintly, like a mirror without depth. She reached for the key she no longer possessed, then turned away. The record remained sealed, and so did she. Her name, once printed worldwide, had been reduced to 2 initials, sufficient for paperwork, insufficient for memory. In 1979, the hospital where the world's youngest mother had once given birth, prepared another report under the same surname. Gerardo Medina, aged 40, was admitted with symptoms of persistent fatigue and joint pain. The attending physician suspected anemia, but blood tests revealed advanced bone marrow failure. The diagnosis, written in tight handwriting across the page, read simply, elastic anemia, etiology undetermined. For weeks, treatment followed protocol. Transfusions, monitored isolation, sterile diet. Gerard's records listed him as cooperative, articulate, optimistic. The staff knew nothing of his origin. He was registered as an ordinary patient, his history unremarkable. Only one visitor came daily, a small, quiet woman whose presence went largely unnoticed. She signed in as L. Medina. The clinic had changed names since 1939. But its corridors remained the same. White tiles, glass windows, the same faint chemical odor. Lina recognized everything. The pattern of floor cracks, the distant hum of equipment, the soft echo of carts against walls. Time had not altered the building. It had only replaced the people inside. Her son now lay in a bed identical to the one she had occupied for decades. Earlier, medical progress offered little comfort. Tests for immune deficiency, bone marrow aspiration, and chemical exposure all yielded inconclusive results. One report speculated a hereditary factor. Another dismissed the idea. The case attracted minor attention in the internal medical review, but no external notice. He was, to his doctors, one of many. Lina remained at his bedside most nights. The nurses assumed she was his aunt. When one asked about the boy's mother, she replied, "She died long ago." It was the only untruth that protected both of them. By late September, his condition worsened. Platelet counts dropped. Infections multiplied. On the 28th, at 3:45 a.m., cardiac arrest was recorded. Attempts at resuscitation failed. The death certificate was signed at 4:10 a.m. by the supervising physician of hematology. The form bore the letterhead of the Lazada Clinic, the same institution that had delivered him. The certificate's witness signature belonged to L. Medina, written in a steady, legible hand. The registrar noted, "Relationship to patient as undisclosed." The hospital clerk, unfamiliar with the history, filed the document without comment. The autopsy revealed no cause beyond marrow depletion. Under contributing factors, the examiner typed unknown. The body was released to family custody that afternoon. Funeral records show a brief service attended by 6 people. No press, no public notice. The casket was small, unadorned, lowered quickly into the soil of Lima's General Cemetery. That same week, foreign journalists revisited old archives while preparing retrospective articles on medical wonders of the century. Lina's name reappeared in their drafts attached to a single line. Her son, born healthy, died of natural illness at 40. The irony passed unnoticed by most readers. Only the repetition of her name tied the stories together. At the clinic, her employment record was still active. Her file listed her as part-time clerical staff, duties unchanged. She returned to work 3 days after the funeral, reviewed patient ledgers, and signed correspondence in her usual manner. The act was mechanical, a continuation of survival. No one mentioned condolences. When the death certificate was archived, it was placed beside the original surgical record from 1939. 2 generations, 2 files, mother and son, both preserved under sterile classification. A clerk completing inventory added a final line to the internal index, case completed. In that sterile phrasing, history closed. Its circle, the same building that it had witnessed an impossible birth, now documented its silent conclusion. Under fluorescent light, the paper edges yellowed slowly. No further entries were made. By the early 2000s, Lina Medina de Gerard lived quietly in Peru, married to Raul Gerard, the father of her second son. Her life had narrowed into a private perimeter few could enter. No plaque, no monument, no official acknowledgement of her record existed. The case that once filled newspapers and journals remained alive only in archives and medical indexes, summarized in a single line. Youngest mother in recorded history. In 2002, a Reuters correspondent located her address through civil records and requested an interview. The letter was short, polite, and translated into Spanish. It offered to honor her courage. She refused without hesitation. Her husband answered the door, returning the envelope unopened. The agency's follow-up cable confirmed what others had already discovered. Subject declined all contact. Researchers, unable to reach her, turned instead to documentation. Biopsies, X-rays, and reports by Dr. Edmundo ESL were re-examined by historians of medicine. Each verification confirmed the same conclusion: authentic, unprecedented, unresolved. The case no longer required interpretation. It had become evidence without emotion. Among the preserved materials, one photograph remained. The sole verified image taken during pregnancy in April 1939, it showed a 5-year-old girl, body distended, eyes blank against a neutral backdrop. The image reappeared in journals and online reproductions, its caption recycled endlessly. Subject, L. Medina, 5 years, 7 months. Pregnant at 7½ months gestation. The repetition transformed the image into both proof and wound. At home, she avoided discussion of the past, even with family. Her second son grew up knowing little beyond fragments. To neighbors, she was an unremarkable woman who worked in administration and attended church on Sundays. The shadow of her earlier life existed only in records she never saw. When journalists or documentarians sought her again, they found only silence. Medical historians debated how such precocious puberty could occur. Theories varied. Hormonal mutation, glandular disorder, genetic anomaly, but all agreed the conception itself was indisputable. Yet the question of who impregnated her remained unanswered, and the official documents, still intact, listed the same word beside father, unknown. The blank endured longer than any living witness. In Lima's academic circles, her case was cited in lectures under pathological reproduction. Students took notes mechanically, unaware that the woman herself was still alive less than 100 miles away. No one considered contacting her. No one imagined she would respond. Late in life, Lina's health was described as good. She lived into old age, tending to her home and family, rarely photographed, never quoted. The world moved on. Yet her story resurfaced periodically, each time condensed, sanitized, abstracted into medical language. No rumor, no revision altered the essential fact. A 5-year-old girl had carried a pregnancy to term. The impossibility had hardened into permanent record. When archivists from the Peruvian National Academy of Medicine later digitized historical files, they encountered her case once again. The documents were clean, orderly, preserved under stable temperature. One archivist paused at the final page, scanning the typed fields. Name, birth date, procedure, attending physicians. Every section was complete, except the final line. It read, "Father." He hovered over the space, uncertain whether to leave it blank or fill it with the only truthful word available. Unknown. He chose not to alter it. The file was closed, scanned, and placed into digital storage. Its metadata listed the same year of discovery, 1939. And the same place of origin, Taekrupo. Nothing had changed but the medium of preservatives. But decades later, that empty space remained the only unresolved detail in the most documented case in medical history.